Lyonel Baratheon did not rise for a throne, but for a broken vow. When a prince broke the marriage promise given to his daughter, it was not only a family that was wounded. What was wounded was the pride of a house. And in Westeros, sometimes the most devastating wars begin not with swords, but with promises not kept. To understand Lyonel Baratheon, one must first see what kind of man he was, because some people leave a mark not only by what they do, but also by the way they do it. Lyonel was that kind of man. He was loud, strong, flamboyant, but that flamboyance was not empty ornament. He was one of the men who carried real fire within. It was not for nothing that he was called the Laughing Storm. Even in his laughter, there was defiance. His joy was not gentle. It came like a storm. His anger was the same. To be the Lord of Storm's End was already, in itself, a heavy identity. The walls of that stone castle had resisted not only the wind, but time as well. To rule there did not mean carrying an ordinary lordship. To be the Lord of the Stormlands meant carrying on one's shoulders the shadow of the old kingdom days. House Baratheon was bound to the Iron Throne, of course, but in the memory of the Stormlands, the crown was a new thing. Those lands had once borne the name of their own kings, so Lyonel was not merely a great lord, he was also the living pride of a house that had carried kingship in its past. For such a man, a promise was not only a marriage agreement, a promise was the order itself. A lord's weight was not measured only by the height of his castle or the number of his soldiers. It was measured by how much his word was trusted. What he promised, what he protected, what he forgave, what he did not forgive, these formed a lord's true armor. And especially when the matter was a marriage promise made between dynasties, the issue grew even larger. Because such promises did not only unite the lives of two young people, they bound together the interests, honor, and future of two houses. The role given to Prince Duncan Targaryen was exactly this. He was not an ordinary prince. He was the heir to the Iron Throne, so the marriage he would make could not be merely a personal choice. Whom he would marry, which house a bond would be formed with, which house would draw closer to royal blood. Each of these carried political meaning. A betrothal made with the daughter of a great lord was not merely an emotional wish. It was a guarantee given before everyone. The crown looked strong as long as it stood behind that promise. But when that promise was broken, what was shaken was not only a family, but the crown itself. When Prince Duncan broke this betrothal and chose to marry Jenny of Oldstones, he followed his own heart. It is not easy to ignore the human side of this, because love, noble or common, is one of the forces that can pull a person outside the order. In some stories, love purifies everything. In others, it complicates everything. In Westeros, it is most often the second that happens. There, even love is not without cost. A prince may marry the woman he loves, but when an heir does so, that decision does not remain only his. The weight of the decision also falls on the shoulders of everyone around him. This is exactly where the root of Lyonel's anger lay, because what was done to him was not merely to say, "I will not marry your daughter." It was heavier than that. more public, more wounding. What was said to him was this: "The promise given to you is no longer binding for us. The place your house expected can be pulled away in an instant. Your political weight can be withdrawn in a single stroke before the royal will, and you are expected to accept it." Some men swallow such a humiliation with clenched teeth. Some demand compensation. Some withdraw in silence and begin to wait for their time. But Lyonel Baratheon was not one of those men. His nature was not suited to silent withdrawal. He was not someone who turned inward when broken. He was someone who spilled outward. When wounded, he did not shrink, he grew. And sometimes the most dangerous people are exactly like this, because instead of carrying pain within themselves, they throw it back at the world. Still, it would be incomplete to see Lyonel only as an angry father here. Yes, there was a personal side to the matter. The promise given to his daughter had been broken. That was not a small wound, but alongside that wound there was an even bigger issue: authority. If a great lord is humiliated before everyone's eyes and gives no response, he weakens, not only at court, but in his own lands as well. His vassals look, his rivals look, even his friends look, and they silently ask this question: if such a great insult goes unanswered, where does the boundary of this house begin, and where does it end? This is exactly the cruelty of the feudal order. Reactions that seem extreme to us today can sometimes appear logical within that world, because there, reputation is not an abstract concept. It gathers soldiers, it opens doors, it produces loyalty, it delays betrayal, it makes marriages, it prevents wars. When a lord's honor is broken, what breaks is not only his pride, but also his political usefulness. That is why Lyonel's anger from the beginning was not only emotional. What was emotional turned very quickly into what was political. Another reason for this transformation was the old weight carried by the Baratheon name. If Lyonel had been the head of an ordinary house, perhaps he would have reacted more narrowly. But he sat in a castle that carried the legacy of the Storm Kings. The stones of Storm's End do not teach submission. They teach resistance. We are speaking of a house that lives in a place where the wind never falls silent. There, dignity is not only something ceremonial, it is hard, like nature itself. That is why the anger inside Lyonel did not remain only at the point of, "they insulted me." It turned into a desire to prove that a house was not crushed, could not be crushed, and so the personal wound turned into a political crisis. This transformation may seem as if it happened all at once, but in fact it contains a very old reflex within it. In Westeros, the answer to an insult is sometimes given with a letter, sometimes with a duel, and sometimes by raising banners. Lyonel chose the third way. He believed that defending his broken dignity with words alone would not be enough, because a vow had been broken with a vow. In his view, to set this right required a harsher language, and that language was power. At this point, it is easy to dismiss his rebellion as nothing more than a burst of pride, but every easy interpretation remains incomplete. Lyonel truly was proud, even too proud. Yet, what made him dangerous was not only his pride, it was that his pride was accompanied by a convincing logic. In his eyes, the problem was simple. The royal family had broken a binding agreement made with him. If such an act went unpunished, then after this no great lord could fully trust the bond he formed with the crown. Today, the broken promise had been given to House Baratheon. Tomorrow, it could be given to another house. Today, it was Storm's End that was humiliated. Tomorrow, it could be another powerful house. Lyonel turned his own wound into a crack in the entire order, and it was here that he found the ground that legitimized his rebellion. But, of course, the matter was not only about being right, because a person can walk into disaster even when he believes he is right. In fact, most great disasters begin exactly like this. The feeling of "I was wronged" is a very powerful fuel. If old pride, military strength, and public humiliation are added to it, all that remains is a spark, and Lyonel had more than enough of that spark. When the rebellion began, this had ceased to be a small family matter to be resolved at court. From that moment on, the issue turned into a clash between the king's authority and the honor of a great house. And the dangerous side of this clash was this: neither side could easily step back. If Lyonel stepped back, he would have trampled his own pride. If the king stepped back, the seriousness of the Iron Throne would be damaged. That is why, at the center of the matter was no longer a broken betrothal by itself, but the question, whose word carries more weight? At this point, Lyonel did not act only like a resentful lord. By declaring himself the Storm King, he enlarged the matter even further. This was a very important step, because here there was a symbolism that went beyond an ordinary objection. He was not only saying, "I was wronged." At the same time, he was saying, "The past of my house is not so small that it can carry this humiliation in silence." To assume the old royal title again meant to enlarge the wound with history. This was no longer only a grievance between a father and a prince, but a defiance that summoned the crowns of the past into the present. Within this decision, there was both courage and blindness. There was courage because not everyone had it in them to raise banners against the Iron Throne. There was blindness because speaking in the language of the past could also mean misreading the power of the present. House Baratheon was strong, yes. The Stormlands were loyal and warlike, yes. But the Iron Throne was still the Iron Throne. Moreover, the reign of Aegon V was the period of a king trying to mend dynastic bonds and hold the realm together. An open challenge to such a king carried not only a military calculation, but also a great political risk. Here, Lyonel's personality once again becomes decisive, because some men calculate and some men settle accounts. Lyonel was of the second kind. He does not appear like a politician who acts only by thinking about the outcome. He appears more like a man who places his dignity before the world. Such men sometimes inspire those around them. Sometimes they drag everyone with them into the fire. Their strength comes from their sincerity. Their weakness is born from the same place, because they truly believe in themselves. And a person most often loses measure when he believes in himself too much. much. Still, it would be insufficient to draw Lyonel as nothing more than a proud rebel, because within his reaction, there is also a correct intuition about how Westeros works. In that world, marriages are the instrument of order, not of love. Dynasties often marry off their children not for personal happiness, but for political balance and for royal heirs. This is even more so. That is why Prince Duncan's decision, however understandable it may be on a human level, was politically destabilizing. That decision was more than a person listening to the voice of his heart. That decision was the withdrawal of a promise given in the name of the crown. And as Lyonel answered it, he was, in his own way, saying the same thing. If you choose your heart, then I choose my pride. What a strange mirroring this is. On one side, a prince who turns away from the road to kingship for the sake of love. On the other, a lord who rises against a king for the sake of pride. Both listen to their inner voice. Both make others pay the cost. Both come to the point of, I cannot live without doing this. And both cling so tightly to their own truth that they carry the political fracture forming around them all the way to the end. That is why Lyonel's story is not only a story of rebellion, it is also a story about the public consequences of personal impulses. A prince's love, a lord's anger, a king's authority, each of these might be something manageable on its own, but when they clash at the same time, what emerges is something that exceeds the scale of an individual. From that hour on, the matter becomes less the emotions of individuals than the fragility of institutions. The power of the Iron Throne was fed not only by dragons or armies, but by the validity of its word. The loyalty of the great houses was fed not only by fear, but by belief that the order would function justly. When one link of this chain breaks, everyone begins to keep their hand closer to their sword. Lyonel's rebellion did not reach the scale of a great continental war, but the fact that it was short-lived does not mean it was unimportant. Sometimes short crises are more instructive than long wars because they lay bare the essence of the matter. That was the case here as well. Beneath all the splendid titles, banners, and challenges lay a single question. How much can a lord's dignity be bought for? And the answer was this: it cannot always be bought. Sometimes it can be weighed only with blood, risk, and open defiance. That is why the peak of the rebellion tells us so much, because at the climax of this story, the man who appears before us is not Prince Duncan Targaryen. This distinction is important. The person who broke the marriage promise given to his daughter is Prince Duncan, but the man who came against Lyonel with a sword is Sir Duncan the Tall. The names are similar, but the place they carry is entirely different. One is the prince who broke the chain through a personal choice. The other is the warrior who stood on the side of the crown and ended the crisis with physical strength and courage. This distinction makes the story even more ironic, because Lyonel's anger swells because of one Duncan, but his mealing comes by the hand of another Duncan. The single combat between Ser Duncan the Tall and Lyonel Baratheon is one of the most striking moments of this story, because in that duel, It is not only two men who face one another, two understandings face one another as well. On one side, storm pride that says the answer to an insult can only be given in the field. On the other, the will of the crown that says the order of the realm must resolve this crisis without turning it into an all-out war. In such moments, the duel ceases to be a personal display. It turns into a kind of political translation. Everything that cannot be said is said in steel. Lyonel did not step into that clash only as a rebel. He stepped into it as the final bearer of his own claim. If he won, the honor of his rebellion would grow, and his challenge would be legitimized. If he lost, the matter would not be only a military defeat. It would have been answered within the language he himself had chosen. That is, a man who said, "Only power can silence me," would truly have been silenced by power, and he was defeated. The rebellion collapsed with him, but what matters here is not only that he was defeated, it is how he was defeated. Lyonel was stopped not by being crushed, humiliated, or erased, but within the harshest yet most intelligible measure accepted by his world. This makes his defeat even more bitter, because sometimes a person is wounded more deeply when he is defeated, not by a method he hates, but by a method he respects. For Lyonel, this ending was less humiliating than shattering, because he had spoken in the language of the sword and received an answer in the same language. To go further now would not be to defend honor, but to sanctify stubbornness. That is why he knelt. That kneeling, then, is at least as important as the rebellion for understanding Lyonel's character, because some proud men know only how to rebel. Lyonel, however, also recognized defeat. This does not make him smaller, it makes him more tragic. In that moment, we see at the same time both the proud lord within him and the man forced to accept the limits of the world. As real as he is when he rebels, he is just as real when he yields, because the matter was not only anger, it was honor, and honor sometimes requires drawing the sword, and sometimes, when defeated, stopping. Yet nothing was truly over, because crises like this close with a duel, but their echoes last for years. The realm could not leave this wound by simply saying, "The rebel was defeated, the matter is closed." The broken bond needed to be woven again, and for this, Westeros' oldest instrument came into play once more. Marriage. Lyonel Baratheon's son and heir, Ormond Baratheon, was married to King Aegon V's daughter, Princess Rhaelle Targaryen. This says much, because the wound opened by a broken promise was attempted to be closed with another marriage. Broken trust was repaired with a new dynastic bond. The closeness, once rejected, was reestablished in another generation. This solution may, at first glance, look like a political stitch, but when you look more deeply, one of the most painful sides of this story lies here as well, because the matter does not return to the beginning. The same wound does not close in the same way. The betrothal that Prince Duncan broke is not compensated exactly as it was. Instead, a new order is established, and this shows us this. Some fractures are repaired, but not erased. The system continues. Dynasties form bonds, children are born, banners stand side by side again. But what happened is never truly taken back. That is why Lyonel's story is so human, because it is like this in most people's lives as well. A great rupture happens, then somehow life continues. Relationships are rebuilt, balances form again, wounds scar over. But a person does not return to his old self. The world does not either. One moves forward, but the moment left behind becomes a part of identity. For Lyonel, it was the same. He should be remembered neither only as a rebel, nor only as a father whose pride was wounded. He is a figure who shows very harshly this. When dignity meets politics, it does not always retreat. Sometimes it attacks. Sometimes it spills over. Sometimes it becomes dangerous to the extent that it finds itself right. And most importantly, sometimes the line between honor and stubbornness within a person becomes so thin that even he cannot distinguish where one ends and the other begins. That is also Lyonel's most tragic side, because the impulse within him is not wholly base. On the contrary, part of it commands respect. Even today, it is possible to ask, how can a man swallow such an insult done to him? This question is not unjust. But then the second question comes, how far should a man go when he is insulted? The answer to this second question is harder. Lyonel is very strong in the first question. He begins to fracture in the second. It is understandable that he does not forgive what was done to him, but turning it into rebellion and an old kingship claim brings the honor within him closer to stubbornness. And right there, tragedy is born. That is why it is easy both to love Lyonel and to criticize him. What is hard is being able to do both at the same time. It is possible to look at him and say, this is a true Lord, because he did not swallow humiliation in silence. He did not cheapen the value of his house. He showed everyone that a promise given to the king's heir is not a toy. But at the same time, it is also possible to look at him and say, this is the abyss into which pride drags a man, because the answer he gave to his broken dignity carried his own people to the brink of war. In defending himself, he crossed the line. In trying to protect his honor, he strained the order. Perhaps the most striking thing about this story is this. Here, no one is entirely the representative of a cheap evil. Prince Duncan is not a heartless monster. He is a man who gave up something great for the woman he loved. But his decision harms others. Lyonel is not a dishonorable opportunist. He is a lord defending the dignity of his house. But his reaction is destructive. King Aegon V is not an unfeeling machine. He is a ruler trying to preserve the balance of the realm. But the decision in his family shakes the seriousness of the monarchy. Everyone is human. Everyone moves from an understandable place, and precisely because of that, the outcome is so heavy. Because tragedies most often arise not from devils, but from understandable people. Lyonel's story shows us how personal politics can be, and how political the personal can be. A man rises for the injustice done to his daughter. Then that rising affects the loyalty of a region, the king's authority, and the bond between dynasties. Another man wants to marry the woman he loves. Then which becomes a spark for a rebellion. A king wants to hold the realm together. Then the broken promise within his family tests the credibility of the throne. None of them sees his own act as so great at first. But in a place like Westeros, great events sometimes begin exactly like this. Personal choices that want to seem small give birth to political consequences that must be large. And there's also the quiet but powerful side of the matter, the continuation of the bloodline. The marriage of Lyonel Baratheon and Princess Rhaelle did not remain only as a peace stitch. That bond reached into later generations. From that line, Steffon Baratheon was born, and from him came Robert, Stannis, and Renly. That is, the Targaryen-Baratheon relationship, once shaken by a broken betrothal, also carried within it the vein that would years later run into one of the most shattering dynastic clashes in the history of Westeros. This does not mean that Lyonel's rebellion alone determined everything, but history has a strange habit. A break repaired in one generation is heard again in another generation, in another form. Perhaps that is why Lyonel's story is not small. He may not have shattered the realm. He may not have left behind a war epic hundreds of pages long. But what he left is finer, more lasting. He shows how costly the pride of a house can become. He shows that the breaking of a promise does not only change the calendar, but also changes how people see themselves. And most importantly, he reminds us of how close honor and pride stand to one another. A person often sees that line clearly from afar. When it does not hurt him, it is easy to say, he should have stopped here. But when the matter touches your own house, your own family, the weight of your own name, the line becomes blurred. Lyonel's tragedy lies here. He did not want to be humiliated. Perhaps he truly had been, but then he enlarged that rightful wound so much that what he was defending and what was consuming him became intertwined. That is why Lyonel is neither merely a figure of warning, nor merely a monument of honor. He is a man who stands between the two. And perhaps that is why he is unforgettable. Because in the history of Westeros, there are many warriors, many rebels, many proud lords, but not all of them leave a mark of the same depth. Lyonel's story stays in the mind because his war is not, in the full sense, for power. It does not begin with ambition for the crown. It does not carry a desire for conquest. First, there is a wound. First, there is hurt. First, there is a promise not kept. Then that promise grows gradually inside a man. It turns first into anger, then into pride, then into rebellion. That is what makes the story powerful. Because a person understands this, a person sometimes makes his greatest mistakes at the moments when he feels most right. Lyonel, most likely, did exactly that. But what does not diminish him is that he made this mistake not cowardly, but with his full weight. He was willing to pay the price. He was willing to lose as well. While wanting to protect his own pride, he set an entire kingdom against himself. Is this wisdom? Not always. Is this courage? Yes. Is this honor? Partly. Is this stubbornness? Certainly. It is because of this mixture that Lyonel Baratheon cannot be reduced to a simple lesson sentence. He is an example of how closely a virtue and a flaw resemble one another within the same body. And perhaps in the end, the most honest sentence left is this: Lyonel Baratheon did not forget the insult, but in carrying it, he allowed it to carry him as well. A promise was broken, a lord rose, a rebellion was born, a duel put the final point, a marriage stitched the wound, and history went on its way. But between the stones of that road, the same question still echoes. While defending what, does a person begin to lose himself? That is why Lyonel's story belongs not only to the past, because even if power changes, even if titles change, that thin war within a person between honor and pride never ends. Lessons that can be drawn from this story: honor can make a person rise, but by itself it does not give direction. Honor is precious. Sometimes, if a person stays silent where he should not stay silent, he loses his own weight. Lyonel's wound is real. His first reaction to it is understandable. But when honor is not balanced with reason, it carries a person from defense into attack. Rising is one thing. Knowing where you are walking is another. Pride and dignity are not the same thing. Dignity is a person's preserving his own worth. Pride, on the other hand, sometimes turns into the desire to force others to accept that worth. Lyonel had both within him. The problem was that after a point he could not distinguish which one was speaking. This is exactly where a person makes a mistake. While thinking he is defending himself, he actually begins only to feed his pride. Stubbornness looks like strength at first glance, but most often it increases the cost. Knowing how to stop after one step is not weakness. On the contrary, sometimes true strength is there. Lyonel's story shows us that even a rightful stand, when joined with stubbornness, can produce disaster. A person does not have to carry every war all the way to the end. Not enlarging some wars is also a virtue. Even love is not without cost. Prince Duncan's decision shows this clearly. The voice of the heart can sometimes be very powerful, but especially the personal decisions of people who hold power do not remain only theirs. Love can be noble, but the consequences it produces can still be destructive. Good intention does not always produce a good result. Power is hidden not only in the sword, but in the reliability of one's word. A kingdom does not stand only with armies. It stands with the seriousness of the promises it gives. The weight of a house is not measured only by the number of soldiers. It is measured by how much trust it gives. This story reminds us that a broken promise can sometimes be more dangerous than open war. Anger demands a cost, even when it is justified. A person may truly have been hurt, truly humiliated, truly right, but anger does not automatically turn being right into wisdom. Lyonel's anger was not empty, but it still produced a cost. That is why the question a person must ask himself is not only, am I right, but where is this rightness taking me? Lyonel Baratheon's story stays in the mind most of all for this reason, because within it there is both a weight worthy of respect and a hardness from which to take warning. If If you like going deep into stories like these together, stay here. In the next telling, we will speak of another broken pride of Westeros, another silent war